With the Batman coming out this week, I'm going back and reviewing each of the Batman movies I hadn't previously properly reviewed on my channel. Today we're talking about Batman Forever. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts on Batman Forever, the first of the Joel Schumacher Batman films. Also, give me some context. Is it a movie you've grown up watching, or is it something that you've watched more recently for the very first time? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and some of that context. As for me, the movie came out when I was in middle school, and as someone that had loved the previous two Batman films and who was just young enough to not be particularly aware of things, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie when it first came out and didn't even pick up on the fact that there was a pretty radical tonal shift between Tim Burton's Gotham films and Joel Schumacher's campy films, at least when it came to this movie. I remember just being so excited to go check it out. I had the official novel. Also, keep in mind when this movie came out, Jim Carrey was just a force of nature, in particular for people my age. I believe Ace Ventura came out when I was in the 6th grade, and then we got Dumb and Dumber right in the 7th grade, The Mask when I'm in the 7th grade, and then we got Batman Forever right before the 8th grade. And all of those movies were just beloved by middle schoolers. And so that just added this whole other energy to this film at the time of its release. But history has not been particularly kind to Joel Schumacher's Batman films. So let's get started talking about this film with the good. And if you've been tracking along with my previous Batman reviews, you know that I heavily criticized both Batman 89 as well as Batman Returns for not being Batman stories. He is not the focus of those movies in both of them. Batman appears in like the first 5 minutes and then he disappears for like 25 minutes. And Batman Forever is both a Batman-centric as well as Bruce Wayne-centric story. Batman is featured all throughout the film in the action sequences, as well as meeting up with Chase Meridian and other things. And then it tells an actual story about Bruce Wayne trying to process through his identity as both Bruce Wayne as well as Batman, and then pulling in an orphan that reminds him of his own tragedy, and that kind of sets up some of this existential crisis that he's going through in the film. Bruce Wayne has an arc in the movie. He is prominent in the movie, and he's not just kind of like this isolated character that only interacts with love interests and Alfred as Bruce Wayne. He's actually had Wayne Enterprises, he interacts with the staff, and like I said, he grows, he changes. That is a big improvement over the previous two films that forgot, oh yeah, Batman should be the star and the focus of our Batman movie. Also, I think that the action here is better, and there's more of it. Just right out of the gate, you get these really big, gigantic action sequences, and certainly we'll get into that later, but criticize some of the campiness, the goofiness of these sequences, but it understands this is an action movie. We want action. And so right out of the gate, you have helicopters and fights. And then every 10, 15 minutes, something else happens that stands out, that's big, that's exciting. And like I said, there's things to criticize about these action sequences, but they do stand out. They are memorable. They do leave a mark when you watch them. Also, it's a movie that has a pretty phenomenal soundtrack. I had the soundtrack. Of course, the big, gigantic hit from the album and the movie was Kiss from a Rose from Seal, which is an amazing song that had a music video filled with footage from this movie. But the whole thing is just, it's U2, it's The Offspring, and then kind of more indie darling type bands in there too. So just a really great soundtrack for the movie. And they didn't get Danny Elfman back, so there is a new score here. But it's a new score that in and of itself, while not as good as Danny Elfman's, it's still actually a really good superhero theme that gets stuck in your head. And because the Danny Elfman one is more iconic, and then they adapted it into Batman the Animated Series, it's one that stands out. So it's easy to kind of like forget about the score in this one, but every time I watch these movies, like I remember every note and the music cues and everything. Like he did a really good job while just not being Danny Elfman at the same time. And I think there is something to the fact that Joel Schumacher had a unique vision for Batman that was inspired by the 60s show. It was influenced by modern trends and had his own ideas that he brought into it. And it's totally consistent. It feels like the work of one person's mind that had this idea of what this movie should be like, what it should feel like. It's consistent in what it's going for. Is it to everyone's taste? Is it the right direction to take Batman? We can, of course, argue about all of that, but I think he knew what he was doing, he knew what he was aiming for, and he accomplished telling that story that he wanted to tell. And when it comes to the casting with this movie, I will have some issues when we get into the negative, but they did get a bunch of charismatic leading actors, people that have a screen presence. There's not a bunch of people that just kind of feel off in regards to their performance, whether they fit the part, whether it's a good characterization, a good adaptation of the comic source material. We'll get into that. But they're all people, they're all actors that can hold your attention and convince you of the part that they're playing. So I think this movie a little bit too often gets points against it because it was followed up by Batman and Robin, which I think was just a worse version of this movie that went too far in all the wrong directions. This movie still, I think, had things to offer, and it was the right way to do kind of this version of a campy take on Batman with some 90s aesthetics. I still don't think it's all that great of a movie, though, so let's move on to the bad. And as much as I can respect the fact that Joel Schumacher had a distinct vision for Batman and he pulled it off, I don't think it was the right vision for Batman, as this is just a live action cartoon, almost in the vein of self-parody. I mean, the movie kicks off and the first line of dialogue is Alfred being like, "Would you like some sandwiches?" And then Batman goes, "I'll get drive-through."
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
When you're doing that with Batman, as the setting the tone for your movie, you know something's gone a little bit off. And you're talking about a movie that came out a couple years after Batman the Animated Series, which was a literal afternoon cartoon for kids that took the material much more serious, that had much deeper themes, that explored the Bruce Wayne character and took Batman seriously. The actual cartoon that was being made for kids took Batman seriously. And in that context, even when this movie came out, it was too campy. It was too cartoonish. It seemed like a movie that didn't understand that Batman, what people wanted from the character, had changed since the 1960s. And there'd been a lot of development in the comics, through the Burton films, and then even for kids, Batman the Animated Series. And we're starting this movie off with bright colors and I'll get drive-through. And then you go into this big heist sequence where there's this guy that's like, "Oh no, my hearing aid, my glasses," just with this ridiculous over-the-top voice. And even in the suit-up scene, we start off the movie and we're zooming in on bat crotch and stuff like that. And it just feels off immediately, like it was the wrong way to go with Batman, even at the time. And certainly looking back on it almost 30 years later, when you pick such a niche take that was behind the times at the time, it does not age well. It feels like this very peculiar product of 1995 that only could have been released in this one window. There was an overreaction to how dark Batman Returns went, and it just doesn't work anymore. If you're raised on The Dark Knight and then Batfleck, and then I've seen the Batman, if you're raised on those, that's your idea of Batman, and you go back and watch this, this is bizarre. It is a weird experience. So I watched the Batman on Friday, and then the next day I watched this movie. And it's even tough to compare them because there's just so little overlap in what the movies are trying to do. And certainly tonally, they're not even in the same ballpark as to what they're doing. And so it's just odd. That's compounded by the fact that they brought in someone like Jim Carrey to play the Riddler. And they gave him some Jolt Cola This is pre-Red Bull, so they gave him Jolt Cola, told him, go crazy, do your Jim Carrey shtick.
Sucking up your IQ, vacuuming the cortex, feeding off your brain.
And so you just have Jim Carrey just like talking fast, improving, doing his thing, just cranked up to 11 as he was back at the time, 100% of the time. And it doesn't feel like the Riddler at all. And it dates the movie to a time period because it's Jim Carrey in the mid-90s. That's what this is. And that's what you see in this movie. Just, it's a product of its time, even down to who is the hottest, red-hot movie actor right now that'll pull the most people and get the most middle schoolers to show up. Jim Carrey. He's the Riddler then. Does he fit the Riddler? Does it make any sense? Not really. I mean, there's no... we're just do Jim Carrey writing some riddles. That's what we'll do. And that's what you see in this movie. Beyond that, the Riddler arc that he has, his villain motivation. I've said this many times before in many of my other reviews, but this is one of my least favorite villain templates that superhero movies do. It's the weirdo that's scorned by the hero that wants revenge because the hero didn't accept them. They did Syndrome in The Incredibles, Killian in Iron Man 3, and then Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2. I just never find it very compelling that like these little incidents lead to so much destruction. You watch this movie and the admiration and rejection of Bruce Wayne and from Bruce Wayne are all in the same scene, and you're like, well, he was being totally unreasonable.
I need an answer now. I think I deserve it.
Like there's nothing about it that makes you that feels grounded. It just feels like we have to give him a motivation. We have to turn him evil right now, and so it just happens all in this one scene. And I just don't buy into it. Another thing in here, every time I watch this movie that almost weirds me out, is that Chase Meridian is just a total horn dog. I don't know a better way to phrase it, but like she shows up and immediately she's hitting on Batman. Her second scene, she turns on the bat signal, shows up in lingerie and is like, I've always liked the wrong boys. With you, maybe it's black rubber, and grabs his chest. Like, this is her second scene, and they just write her as this highly competent, intelligent woman with her own skill set, and instead of using her as like an ally that Batman really works with to try and bring down these criminals, no, she's just written as a teenage girl that has the hots for a superhero.
What is it about the wrong kind of man? In grade school, it was guys with earrings. Now, black rubber.
That's what they do with her, and it's weird to watch as she's just throwing herself shamelessly at Batman because he's in black rubber. And of course, once again, this provides more moments for goofy moments where he's like, is it the car? Chicks dig the car.
You're trying to get under my cape, Doctor?
A girl can't live by psychoses alone.
It's the car, right? Chicks love the car.
Joel Schumacher and his Batman films. Other odd one in here, the treatment of Dick Grayson. Robin, Dick Grayson is an incredibly difficult plotline, I think, to pull off in live action because the idea of a grown man taking a child to a crime scene to fight crimes is child abuse. In animation, you can have kids flipping around and you can pull things off what you can pull off as believable in animation is different from what works in live action. Because as soon as you see what an actual child looks like a middle schooler, a 13-year-old, next to a grown-up, you're just reminded of the fact that a 13-year-old cannot beat up a room full of grown men. And no matter how athletic they are, they can't do that. And so then, of course, they have to age him up. When this movie came out, or when this movie's filming, Chris O'Donnell was 24. He has like little sideburns. He's driving around on a motorcycle. And so when the Graysons die off, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to the way that this plays out, because when the grown-ups' families dies, they don't move up. They don't move in with a stranger. That's just not what happens. Like, grown-ups don't do that. When you're 18, you're like, I guess I'll move in with that rich guy. It's a plot point that doesn't work. And I mean, I think Chris O'Donnell's fine in the movie in and of himself, and him and Val Kilmer, I think, are kind of fun to see on screen together. But the characterization, the idea of a 25-year-old Robin, you're immediately like, well, what's kind of going on here? What? I can buy Chris O'Donnell joining in on the fighting and everything like that because he's actual grown up, but to do that, you just had to age him up in a way that makes the whole plot line that you're going with here not make any sense. Final thing you got to talk about with this movie is that once you get into the middle act of the movie, up until the finale, you can tell that a bunch of stuff was cut from the film. It's a movie infamous that supposedly there's a much longer cut that's darker, that has a lot more character moments. On the DVD, on the Blu-ray, there's a bunch of deleted scenes kind of filling out some of these character arcs. But like, you're watching the film, so as soon as Riddler and Two-Face meet, it feels like they're montaging through about 20-25 minutes of stuff in about 5 minutes. And it intercuts this crime spree with Alfred and Dick Grayson and Wayne Manor. And then it just cuts to this one scene of Edward Nygma releasing his box, and there's so much demand for it. And it just comes out of nowhere. Like, it's not set up that he's trying to form this corporation. He just releases it, and it's this big, gigantic deal. And then 4 scenes later, all of a sudden we're at the release party for it, and it's the biggest thing in town. And it just feels like there was a whole subplot there that was much more robust that was cut. Likewise, with the plot line about Bruce Wayne and kind of his existential crisis, he goes as Batman to see Chase Meridian at nighttime, and she's like, I think I actually like this other guy now, not you anymore. And then cuts to a scene of Bruce Wayne in the Batcave with Robin, and he's like, I'm Batman no more. I don't need to be both. We don't need to do this anymore. And it just feels like, wait, did we just lose something? That was a big leap. That escalated very quickly. What was in the middle there that led to this moment? Because this doesn't feel like the natural next step from what just happened. And then he's just back to Batman again. And once again, there's deleted scenes on the Blu-ray that elaborate more on some of the stuff that was going on here. But it just seems like there was a lot cut out of the middle of this movie that makes the character arcs not fit together quite the way that they're supposed to, like we're skipping over a bunch of the plot. So while I think this is a movie that does a lot of things right, it is a lot more watchable and a lot more fun than people give it credit for. It does have some significant issues. Real quick, before I give you my final score on this one, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. What do you think about Batman Forever? And are you someone that's been watching it your whole life, maybe 25 years like me? Or are you someone that watched it for the very first time more recently after watching the Nolan films? I'd love to have your perspective on the movie. Also, I'm doing a bunch of these Batman reviews, and I've already reviewed a bunch of the Batman films. You can check those out right up here in this playlist once this video is over. In closing, I think this is a movie that has a lot more to offer than people give it credit for. Joel Schumacher did have a clear vision for what he wanted to do. He made an actual Batman-centric Batman film that gives Bruce Wayne a character arc. There's more action, there's bigger action, there's a lively set of characters, though maybe the characterizations aren't the best, but it is fun all along the way, though there are a number of story problems. There's some odd choices with the characterization, and I just feel also that Joel Schumacher was making a movie that he wanted to see, but wasn't really meant to stand the test of time. Overall, I would give this movie a C+ on the entertainment scale. I will go with a 6 out of 10. And this one is only worth checking out if you are a Batman purist, or if you like kind of campy superhero stories. There is some fun to be had with this movie. If you enjoyed this review, check out my other Batman reviews right over there.